Hello and welcome to another episode of Linux and Code. Today we're continuing the series on building a JSON API with Express, and this time we're talking about sorting and filtering. Let's get started. So per usual, the first thing we're going to do is start up our project so that we can get live updates and everything as they come. A quick note, I did update in between videos the package.json file to update NodeMon to at least 1.18. Due to the recent Flatpak stream security issue stealing bitcoins. I'll link in the description to that vulnerability, but our only dependency that had anything to do with it was NodeMon, so just make sure that's updated if you haven't done that already. So let's get into it. Over here, we're going to open up our read for our user file because that's where we're going to start. And it's pretty common for a user search to be doable, but not on any property in the user object. So we're going to only enable a selective sort, and we're going to only allow people to search on the username property. So first things first, we're going to set up our filter parameter. And we're just going to call that filter. Now, if they don't provide one, we're just going to set it to an empty string. And now, just like we did for our sort query, we're going to build a filter query. Only this time, we're not allowing a dynamic key. We're explicitly limiting this to username. And here we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do a new regular expression. Now, as I mentioned in the last episode, we're going to have one coming up that talks about validations and sanitation of user input data. Directly inputting something from a query parameter into a regular expression filter is not a good idea. We're going to take care of this, but that's going to come in another episode. So for right now, we're just going to directly reference filter. And then we're going to say ignore case. That's what this iParameter flag does. And so now we're looking for any username that matches this filter, and we're ignoring case. Now, given that we have this query prepared, we can start adjusting our count and our find statements to actually do what we want. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to change count to count documents. Count has just been deprecated, and count documents is the new method. Some selectors were changed, but it doesn't really affect us at all. So we're going to pass in this filter query, and then down in find, we're going to pass in the same filter query because we want the same thing on both of them. So now that we have this applied, we actually should have a working filter, but we need to add one thing that we're not currently doing, and that is a catch statement. And we're going to try doing it just at the top level, and we're going to borrow one of our other catch statements, which is rather generic, but we're going to do that for now because we want to handle an error. We don't want our entire application to bomb, but we don't want to give too much information back to the user depending on what they're doing. We can work on improving this in our validations episode, which will be coming later. So now our existing API should work. If we send this, we get back users, which is what we would expect. And our previous sort is still being applied. Let's sort by username. And let's do ascending. Let's send that request. Okay, so now we're sorting by username alphabetically, but let's go ahead and apply our filter. So we're just looking for the filter parameter. So we can just add this on because it's query parameters. You can stack as many of them as you like. And let's search for Abigail here and see what that returns. Okay, the only person we have with Abigail in the username is this Abigail right here. So what if we're a little bit more generic? What if we just search for AGA? So now we're getting more results back, and we still get our total. So there's only 4 of them, and we're on the current page. We get our page size 20, even though there's only 4 documents, our page would still return 20 of them if there were 20. And then our entire list. So let's see where we matched. We matched on this, And same here, and then right here. Okay, so that looks like it's working pretty well. And let's try something else completely. Let's try Danica, but without any capitalization. And we still match that name, which is exactly what we want. So that's the filtering for username. Let's go ahead and do this same thing, but over on our item instead. And we're gonna do item a little bit differently. So normally I would copy some of this, but we're not even gonna bother because this is gonna be different. So we're gonna come over here to item. We're gonna do the same thing, though we are gonna change this to count documents right off the bat. And here we're going to need two properties. We're going to need our filter. And again, if it's not set, it's just empty. But we're also going to add one more. We're going to add a filter on. And what this means is the specific property that we're filtering on. So if we're filtering on content, or if we're filtering on ID, or if we're filtering on created at time, those things can be changed. So query filter on, you could name this whatever you like. That's totally up to you. And again, by default, this is going to be empty. Now we're going to have to do a little bit of magic logic here to take care of that. So we need to find out if we have a filter first of all. So let's do an if filter dot length is greater than 0. So we know we're doing a filtering. If we're not doing a filter, we're going to do something else. And we're going to establish our object up above for this ahead of time because we have to do some weird conditionals. So I'm going to use a let instead of a constant for this. We're going to make a filter query, and it's just going to be an object. Now, in here, if our filter length is greater than 0, we have a filter, but we don't necessarily know if we have a filter on, so we're going to just add one more conditional. And 2 levels of nested if is about as far as you want to go. Otherwise, things start getting messy. And this is, fortunately for us, going to be as deep as we need to go. So right here, we're going to do the same thing that we did for our sort query. So here, we know we have a filter on, and we know we have a filter. So we're just going to do our filter on as the key, and our filter itself for the value. Now, this is if we have a filter on. If we do not, then we're going to set this up a little bit differently. We need to pick a default value. Now I'm going to do creator and then apply the filter to it. So that's always going to look for a creator ID. And actually that's not going to be super useful here because everything in our case already is set to the same creator. So we're going to do content instead. And then if none of this is true, we need a default filter query, which we actually already have as just an empty object. So we can clean this up. We don't need that extra else. So now here in our count documents, we want to pass our filter query. We pass that in to both places, and that should set us up. But we still need a catch statement, just like we did in our user. So we're going to copy our generic one, and now we should have working search and filter for items, and by default it's going to look on the content. So let's come over and make a request. Here's our item. It's sorting by content, order by. Let's change this to created at. So we have most recent first. Make sure our default request works. We get back some notes. That's what we want to see. And there should be 1,000 of them. Let's double check. Yep. Okay. So now we can add one thing at a time. So let's just do filter first. And this is searching by content by default. So let's search for an actual word, the. And there's no items that have the word the because we're using garbage for our notes. So let's get rid of this. The good thing is we didn't get an error there, even though there was nothing that was found. And let's copy one of these garbage words. And let's put our filter back on here. Still getting nothing. And the reason is because I did not add the regular expression into this filter. So we're going to do this once. So if we have a filter, we're going to build a regular expression. And ignore the case. Again, we really need to add validations for this because this is potentially dangerous, just dropping user input directly into a regular expression. Now if we run this request, we get items back. Now, I would expect several of these to have this word, but I would not expect the full 1,000, and indeed we only see 119. Let's search for a whole string of text and see if we can cut that down further. There we go, now we're down to just one. And let's go ahead and do something a little bit different. Let's search for a specific create at date. And we should be able to do this just fine. So our filter on, we'll just add right in here. And we're going to do created at. And the filter, get rid of that long string, is going to just be this date value that I copied from the request. So we should get the same item back and maybe a few more depending on how fast the API was. No item found, and we see we get an error in here. So let's take a quick look at why that is. And it's actually pretty simple. Mongoose is storing created at as an actual date. And when we try to search for one, Mongoose is getting, instead of an actual date, it's getting our regular expression that we searched for and we built out manually. So if you wanted dates to be searchable, you would need to modify this filter a little bit more. Again, another item for the validation episode. We're not going to do that for now. Instead, let's do something like item type. And if we search for note, this should return our full 1,000 again, because everything is of type note. And one other thing that we can do to check in here really quick is if we try to search for something that we have none of. So for example, a picture, we get back nothing, which is exactly what we would want to see. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. That's going to be all for today. If you want to see something else, please drop a comment. If you want to, feel free to subscribe or drop a like. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good day. Take care.